This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, we are privileged to have with us someone who has been with us in the past, and always we look forward to his return to our radio program. And now, Jonathan Wachtel. You should know that your remarks are going to be broadcast all around America. Jonathan is the Global Affairs Analyst, former U.S. diplomat, Senior Policy Advisor and Director of Communications at the United Nations. He worked with Ambassador Nikki Haley and her successor, Kelly Craft, and he is sought after by so many different news outlets. I've seen him doing interviews on all of these different programs. Each one is unique. But Jonathan, having been on all of those stations, you've now made it to the top. You're on the Reverend the Rabbi National.
I feel so privileged, gentlemen. So privileged. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, you helped make it possible. So
I couldn't have said it any better. Go ahead, let's go.
So, Jonathan, I remember during the Reagan years and prior to that as well, the Soviet Union was always viewed as the evil empire. Has that vision changed? I mean, we're hearing about different kinds of relations with Putin, Moscow. Are we in a different place?
Historically, and you'll recall this, Reverend and Rabbi, we used to hear that the United States would be buried by the Soviet Union. That's what the premiers of the Communist Party used to say about us, including Khrushchev. So there's historically been an adversarial reaction to the United States, and it wasn't just passively looking at the United States. It was intended to undo us as a country, as a civilization, to make sure that the Soviet Union, communism, and let's be honest, Moscow ran the show. It was the Russian Federation that was running the show, the Russian Empire, essentially reconstituted in the Soviet Union, that was out there to do us in, to destroy our way of life and to ensure that we were not the dominant superpower.
Things are changing, Jonathan, as you know, with the current administration, reminiscent of the 1920s when we took isolationist policy as a country and began to establish tariffs. There was immigration issues at the time. I mean, here we are reliving it in some ways, even though we've advanced technologically. But what are we creating in Europe with this policy that President Trump is exacting that's alienating our allies? Speak to that, please.
Yeah, so Europe has historically, since the end of World War II, looked at the United States as a savior, as a beacon of democracy, as a leading nation, a democratic nation, and relied on the United States as a partner to promote democracy around the world and shore up their interests coming out of World War II, which was such a devastating event in which over 50 million people were slaughtered. And rebuilding and looking at the United States with the Marshall Plan and everything that we put in that was extremely gracious, generous. The American people are looked upon as being a generous people. And there's been this, I don't want to say complete dependency on the United States or outsourcing of defense positions with the United States, but to a certain degree, an expectation that the United States is a big brother in the good sense of that, not in some sort of nasty way, but a partner there and someone who could be relied upon. Now we're looking at a situation in which the Europeans are being messaged that they have to stand up on their own 2 feet and really put together some sort of defense posture. And have the ability to go on the offensive militarily, independently of the United States. That's where we are today.
Do you think President Trump is right in saying that the relationship has not been equitable that the United States has really been carrying much of the weight in these relationships?
Well, there is a lot of truth to that. In certainly, if you look at the numbers, so the United States defense spending is more than all of the European NATO countries' defense spending plus Canada combined. So we're clearly picking up the lion's share of expense when you do country to country comparisons, and it's pretty dramatic. I mean, it's a head above. Is it all of the European spending? Does European spending look completely paltry? No, but it's oftentimes hovering around 2%, and the United States just per capita spends more on defense. So certainly there's a justification to call for European countries to spend money. Why should the American taxpayer be picking up a tab when Europeans can do it perfectly well themselves in some spheres? Now, there's a cost to that, though, in terms of influence that the United States has and the ability to push our policy, because money talks. So when you're spending a lot of money and there's that dependency, they're going to listen to you because, frankly speaking, you're paying a bill, and they've got to listen to you unless they want to come out and ask their taxpayers to pay more money. So there's a give and take to this new frontier that we're finding ourselves in.
So let's talk about that meeting with President Zelensky, an infamous meeting now. Now, there were those who said it was the right way to go, to be very strong in demanding more from the president. And those say, no, that was not a good way to go. We don't treat our allies that way. How did you react when you saw it?
Here's the thing. We want, if we really care about the people in Russia and Ukraine and getting an outcome out of this hideous war that has been so senseless, so bloody, so costly, so tragic, just horrific. And we want an end to it. But we want an end to it that's going to create an environment in which there's going to be lasting peace and the opportunity for the peoples of these two nations that have, for the lack of a better way of putting it, slaughtered each other for the last 3 years, to try to have some sort of reconciliation. And if we end up in a scenario in which there's a settlement that is so egregiously imbalanced, it's going to be a recipe for fighting to erupt again. Or it will be a recipe for certainly terrorism to erupt, or some sort of effort to try to exact pain on one party versus the other. So when you're in negotiations, and the Ukraine has, historically been an ally since the collapse of the Soviet Union, when you're airing your laundry publicly like that, or differences of opinion before all the eyes of the world, it makes it difficult in terms of the negotiations, and it also, let's face it, signaled to Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin that the United States has a big chasm in terms of differences of opinion into how to end the war and how the war has gone. So it's something certainly that the Kremlin would have appreciated seeing, but everybody in Ukraine and the European nations that are standing behind Ukraine and many countries around the world looked at this and scratched their heads. There's just no doubt.
Yeah. Where do we go from here? I mean, can we rebuild it? Can we ever regain confidence of allies? Or is this just a new time when people say, you know what? The relationship has changed somewhat, and we're going to have to contribute to the solution fiscally and however else is necessary.
So one thing is clear. Looking at that bizarre, I don't know how else to explain it, bizarre exchange at the White House. Certainly that was an impressive event and signaled many different things. But the basic truth is that was an event. Now we really have to focus on where this is going. So that train has left the station, and we are now heading in a direction that one would hope would create that type of balance, would create that type of outcome in ending this war that will promise not just immediate peace, but long-term healing and the ability to bring these two nations back together. I mean, the basic fact is these two nations, when you add them up, I mean, Russia's just so massive. It's so much bigger than the United States. It's just colossal in size. It's the biggest nation on earth. Ukraine is the second largest European nation. It falls under Russia. It's massive. It's bigger than France. It's bigger than Germany. So what's happened here is two territorial giants have been slugging it out. And it really matters how this is resolved, because the territories we're talking about, and Russia currently occupies about 20% of Ukraine, that 20% is larger than most European nations. So there's a lot at stake here. And a lot can go very wrong if this is not worked out in a way that will settle things and end up in a position in which this won't blow up again. The other thing that's going to be different is that Europeans will arm themselves better as a result of this. They will spend more on their defense budgets, and they're going to go into weapons production. There may be, certain situations in which U.S. weapons might not be necessary to them. We don't know where this is going. It's going to be a changed landscape, and certainly NATO will be affected by this as well.
Jonathan, what about leadership lessons? I mean, President Trump at one point in the conversation with Zelensky said, you don't have the cards. You don't hold the cards. Did Zelensky not understand who he was sitting down with and what the nature of the conversation would be like? Was he unprepared?
President Trump's right in terms of not holding the cards at the given moment in terms of where defense spending is, America's might in terms of ballistic missiles and anti-missile batteries and surveillance. There's no one like us now. The Europeans depend on us. They've essentially outsourced a lot of our military capability. And we see now that, the United States is not providing the intelligence. The Russians have been battering Ukrainian towns, and there's been loss of life. And it's clear that Ukraine is susceptible. And, it's just a basic truth. Now, my interpretation of this is that you have a battered president, exhausted from this war, tremendous pressure, needs to get the funding, needs to have the military machinery to be able to push back at Russia, and is seen writing on the wall that has frightened him, and there's a certain level probably of desperation and frustration, and his composure was not helpful to his cause. So, it's not a surprise that things got testy in that room. The unfortunate thing is it got testy in front of all of our eyes.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi.
Other nations are watching. I mean, they watched that exchange. They are now thinking about how they're going to interact with the United States, how they're going to interact with this president. Can you speak to that? If I were the head of state and I'm watching, I'm saying, okay, let me rethink how I'm going to approach this president and the United States now. Can you speak to that, Jonathan?
Yeah, because surely the message is, we'll be your friend, but don't necessarily rely on us for spending to be your friend. We will say nice things to you and we'll support, but don't expect us to take you out to dinner every night, right? It's a different message. But things have changed in terms of perceptions of the United States even before President Trump took over. I mean, we look at the debacle of our withdrawal from Afghanistan and what that's about America's resolve and stick-to-itiveness, when it comes to conflict in our policy and what we're defending as a nation. And we've had situations in which the Kurds have felt slighted by decisions taken by U.S. presidents. We saw the way the Biden administration had issues with one of our closest allies, Israel, and where that left things. And now there's a reversal of posture now with Trump coming in. It's very complicated. It's got to be very confusing as a leader of a nation that is perceived as an ally of the United States, and scratching your head and wondering, what is the United States about now? Are they really going to come to our rescue? if we're in dire straits. Is the United States a reliable partner? The last thing we want is to have nations that are our allies and we're in good relations with begin drifting over to areas that have been, historically our enemy territory. And that could include Russia still. It certainly could include Beijing. And we have other concerns, too. I mean, there's this battle that we're talking about in terms of geopolitics, but there's an effort by nations to try to unseat the U.S. dollar as the common currency amongst BRICS nations. That is something that comes into question here. So there's, teutonic shifts that are underway here. And the implications of what's going on right now are going to have immediate and long-term effects on the United States and our ability to navigate through a very complicated world over the next years and decades.
Jonathan, let me ask you, going now to the Middle East, you mentioned Israel. For many, many years, we've been hearing the two-state solution. That's the only possible resolution of the conflict. Well, many have said, I have a colleague who wrote an article recently, that since October 7th, since we learned that babies were murdered with the bare hands of Hamas or other Palestinians who joined in, there can be no two-state solution. You can't live with someone who is seeking to destroy you. It makes it very clear that that is the plan. So what President Trump has done in terms of presenting other options is welcome to many who say, you know what, maybe this will get people to focus in a different direction and not the same old solution that hasn't produced any constructive results.
So, you're right in that you can't have a two-state solution if one of the parties, and in this case Hamas, has a charter that not just calls for the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of Jews, but actually indeed acts in that way. And that is their raison d'etre. That's them. That's what they are. They are not going to change their stripes. That's who they are. So they are an Islamist, political Islam, fascist organization, and they want to have Islam be the dominant force there. They believe in the caliphate. They just do not have any appetite whatsoever to have a state of Israel next door. It is completely anathema to everything they believe in. So there is no way that there can be two states with that type of leadership in the Gaza Strip, and that type of leadership that quite easily, without trying to break it down, to try to fight against it, could take over the area called the West Bank, where currently the Palestinian Authority is led by Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the authority, who's been in that position for so many years, and there haven't been free and open elections for so long that it's actually ridiculous. So there is no peace partner for the Israelis. So to be talking about a two-state solution is pretty ridiculous at this stage. The Palestinians really need to get leadership in there that is moderate, accepting of a two-state solution. Otherwise, you can't have that solution.
Jonathan Wachtel, it is no wonder people seek you out for your insights. Global affairs analyst, former U.S. diplomat. We have been privileged to be with you for the last 20 minutes, and we hope to hear more of you in the future.
The privilege is mine, gentlemen. Have a great time.